Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Betsy. Everyone, that's Betsy. I'm introducing you. Yeah. And I forget your official title. Awesome. Public Programs Assistant. She was so kind enough to invite me, and I'm very honored to be here today. And I know it's kind of a rainy Thursday, the beginning of the year. Everyone's behind. I am. Your resolutions are falling through. Mine are not. Kudos to me. But thank you so much for being here. Happy New Year. And I'm really delighted, honored, and feel very privileged to be at the Portland Art Museum 2016. And I've been watching videos of this talk, which my friend Heidi said wasn't a good idea because I would get intimidated, and I did. But I feel very happy to be following Heidi, who was the last speaker. I don't know if any of y'all were here for a talk, but it was really beautiful. Just forget about her talk when you hear me, just saying. I've been in Portland for about 6 years now. I moved here in 2010 from Atlanta, Georgia. I basically was a little tired of living in the South, so I looked at the map. And I was like, how far can I go, but still kind of enjoy things? And I was like, Portland, Oregon, and that's how I landed up here. The reason I'm mentioning a map and this simple diagonal is because you'll see how mapping, navigating, and a lack of directional sensibility has informed my work. And the easiest direction I could follow was the diagonal instead of some bounding route to maybe Brooklyn or another amazing country, which may have been better, but I like that diagonal thrust that brought me here. So I'm glad to be here, and thank you to a lot of my friends and colleagues and people from the Art Commission who are here today. Again, I feel really special, especially since I do these things often, and sometimes you are subjected to my talks more than you might want to, but again, thank you. When I was first invited to do this talk, I decided to hear what I wanted to hear, which was, oh, do a piece of, talk about a piece of work and contextualize it in your own work. And later I found out that they're not that concerned about how I contextualize it in my own work. It's more about me talking about that work. But the indulgent me decided it was also about the work and how it relates to my work. So my presentation today is going to be not just about the work, but how I see it in the context of my trajectory, my art, and more importantly, in the larger framework of how we see things in a museum, in a frame, in a contained space, in a time period, etc. So I was thinking, and initially I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to be a prankster and actually talk about the little machines that record the air control, the humidity, and the temperature, because ever since I was young and I went into contemporary spaces, if the artwork disappointed me, that one machine never did. It's a beautiful machine and it's always moving. It was my introduction to interactive sculpture. It was my introduction to mechanical sculpture, functional, non-functional when it was not working in the museums in India, etc. So I was like, I'm going to talk about that, and maybe that's enough. And Betsy was also, yeah, you can do that. But sadly, all those gadgets now are replaced by Honeywell digital little things. And although they are in every space and you see them universally, and this universality is important within the context of what I'm talking today, I just didn't find it interesting enough, so I pushed it aside and decided to talk about Richard Artschwager. Again, I arrived at him after looking at many other works, and some of my friends were like, this sounds like a really obvious choice. I was like, yeah, maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do that. And some of the other works I wanted to talk about already had been spoken about, so I'm like, sorry, Richard, it's you and me. So here I am talking about the work of Richard Artschwager, an artist whose work I have long followed, and it has informed my practice to quite an extent, to a point where he's probably like rocking in his grave saying, stop doing that work, Avantika, or maybe he's saying, yay, you keep my legacy going. Well, welcome to the work of Artschwager. Welcome to these little blips. How many of y'all have noticed this in the museum before, if you visited the museum? Just one. How many of y'all have been to the museum before? Awesome. And only one person has seen these. Awesome. Well, you have. Okay, good.
I think this is the second talk about it.
Yeah? This is the second talk?
I think we were one a few years ago, yeah.
Oh, well, I'll try. But see, that's the thing. It's beat and repeat. Just like his blips are repeated, the talk on the blips must be repeated.
No,
yeah.
it's a different take.
Okay, exactly. Well, so I hope. Yeah. Okay, so these little shapes that you see out here have been posted like little graffiti tags, but without any text or any kind of slang, posted in different locations, in different scales, in different formats, basically since the 60s. It's called a blip, but it's pronounced B-L-I-P. And if you look at it typographically too, there's something really nice. Maybe it's the font I chose, but there's something really nice about the shape of the text, how it echoes the P of Pam, which is another reason I chose it, Pam as in the Pam Portland Art Museum, and of course the curves of the shape itself. But Artschwager calls them blips, but prefers to refer to them as BLPS. And what you see out here are, yes, this is cuckooing. These unique ovular forms, which he started in the 60s, but they became really prevalent in the 70s. This is something he started making when he was a professor at UC Davis, University of California, Davis. And the story at how he arrived at them is kind of interesting, and I'll arrive at that in just a second. I thought it would be nice to also show you an image of the artist working on his pieces. And this is an image of him from a still called Shut Up and Listen, which is a documentary about his work. And I was literally just reading this. This term is one he came up with when he was at a concert with his then girlfriend in Vienna, and he was asking her questions, and she was like, shut up and listen. Or in this case, it became shut up and look. So basically what he's trying to tell us is stop, being so distracted with the world around you and look. And whether a simple dot or a simple highlight or a buzzer of an alarm needs to remind you, one simple beep, one simple dot, one simple mark needs to remind you to stop, listen, and look, and so be it. And that, at the end of the day, is what he wanted his blips to do. Stop and look at the environment around you. We become so bombarded with this sensory overload that we don't look anymore. And why do you want to look? With the intention of basically being more aware and appreciating the tones and the textures of whatever the blip is on, or the lack thereof. Which brings up another point about the location of these blips. I mean, are they really pointing towards something interesting in the museum? Or is it a very convenient location with these three so easily discoverable? And that is a question mark. It's a question mark I pose to the curator of the museum and say, maybe you ought to reconsider where these are, because he wanted these to be discovered and to be placed in areas where things aren't really noticed. And I don't think it is really doing that. My favorite of the 5 blips, there's 3 out here, 1 over here, and 1 back in the room there that I'd urge you to look at. I think that's my favorite location. Richard Artschwager had a background in furniture design. Prior to that, he was a scientist, and he was kind of torn. Should I be a scientist? Should I be an artist? He thought he could make a living by being a scientist, which he did. But one of his wives said, well, the one wife he had said, dude, you're more interested in art, go do art. So after serving in the war, he earned his GI Bill, and through that GI Bill, he started attending art school and also started making furniture. And as some of you know, his works that he's really known for are his furniture pieces, such as this, a table with pink tablecloth. It's all in Formica, which was a very contemporary material. And the reason I'm showing you this piece, as well as this, is maybe you'll see some kind of similarity in the blips that he's got, as well as the reductionist approach that he has in his furniture pieces. An interesting story about how he stumbled into furniture design. He was basically, at one point, while making regular furniture, asked to design a portable pedestal for a Catholic church. It wasn't a pedestal. A portable altar for a church that was on a ship. So this idea of movability, transportability came from his idea of making something that's always in one confined space, but was now traveling because it was on a ship. So I found that kind of interesting. So these are 2 of his furniture pieces. I encourage you to look at some of his other stuff too, like the shattered table, shattered chair on the wall, which is basically like, when you kill a spider, it just goes smush. He does the same thing with a chair, and it just is kind of smushed into the corner. This is the quintessential image of a blip. I guess you guys are seeing many of it right now. It's an oval, lozenge shape, oblong thing. When someone asked him, where did you come up with this shape, and what does this shape look like? His first reaction to describing the shape was, if you sliced a knockwurst, sausages, longitudinally, that would give you a blip. This was his definition. How did you arrive at the shape of a blip? The blips were born in '67 while he was teaching at UC Davis. And just like me, at one point he had to teach figure drawing, which he wasn't that keen on. I mean, I like drawing figures, but somehow I don't like to teach it. So he's like, all right, guys, I'm going to show you how to draw a cat. But you know what? We're going to make this cat really minimal. So basically he said, I think I got it down to 7 or 8 strokes. And in the process, 8 strokes of drawing a cat. And in the process of making these black marks, there were works that looked like this beautiful oval that I wanted to eventually travel with. I wanted that cat to be in different location, but it was a cat no more. All it was this beautiful lozenge. So this piece out here is a cat from the internet. This piece out here is one of his hairy blimps. That's what he calls it. What you see out here are more of his blimps in different locations. This is the Highline Art Space in New York. More of that. What's also interesting is often people think there's something functional with these marks of his, but clearly there's not. So in the process of looking at the water fountain and wondering what that might be, maybe they noticed the structure of the water fountain, which was what Richard Artschwager wanted. I really love this one. I mean, maybe I'd noticed that plane in the sky, but now I notice it even more. And seeing these in person is beautiful. So as you can see, this is at the Hammer Museum. And this is also part of a show that the Hammer Museum organized. And what I like about this is that instead of pointing or highlighting what should be looked at, it's beginning to obliterate it. So it's not just about looking, it's about interfering with looking and being a little prankster-esque, if you will. And this piece out here is another blip that's a big, blobby, three-dimensional shape. So I've been seeing his blips for a while, mostly digitally, but in a few occasions I've seen them in person. And some of the nicest ones, and these aren't my images, this is from the MoMA website, these are the ones I've liked the most because I really do like the simplicity of the image without there being too much visual information in the background, but still a richness of texture and age and time, as you can see, with the snow around. So that's my little take on the blips, and my hope is that you guys will go home and maybe Google it, maybe make a template of your own blip or your own mark and start putting that mark on different things, which is something I started doing a few years ago, and now when people see orange dots, they think of me. Awesome. That's why TriMet started this new train, because of the orange dots. When people think of red dots, they think of me, Indian. When people think of yellow dots, they think of something I did at Disjecta several years ago. So I've become the dot lady, but someday I hope to go beyond the dot. That was a bad pun. Anyway, I want to show you a few images now of my work where I've taken this idea of Artschwager's single graphic mark, a beautiful single highly enclosed mark, and embracing the simplicity and potential of it being repeated without getting bored and overdoing it, which is something I often tend to do. And as a self-proclaimed minimalist, which I am sometimes, I think I need to look at these guys, Artschwager, Judd, Flavin, Mccracken, and how they embrace the simplicity. It takes balls to do something like that. So I'm going to show you a few works that hint at marking, pointing, and indicating, starting with a piece I did several years ago, and this was a very direct influence of Richard Artschwager. This was a show in Boca Raton, and I was invited to somehow connect the 6 or 4 different gallery spaces and spaces at the university where this biennial was being held. They're like, oh, we're all over the place. Create something that will connect these. I said, you're asking me, the directionally challenged person? Fine, I'll try. So here I was in Florida, a city that is all about car culture, Boca Raton, Florida, a place that's all about car culture. where people are told how to go from one point to the other. This is back in 2008, so GPS is not so prominent through highway signs. And when we look at highway signs, especially when you're driving, it's always a fleeting moment. So I wanted to take the shape of that highway sign and the color, the teal, slightly lighter because it's Florida, and skew it because when we see things at an angle, there's always a sort of a trapezoidal skew. And I like how that trapezoidal shape also indicates a little bit of movement, but the movement is softened by these softened edges. So this trapezoidal teal color became my blip that I placed throughout the space of the biennial in an attempt of connecting the different galleries, but also creating a space of ponder and emptiness, which is why there was no information on these. And apparently that drove a lot of the students crazy. They're like, what are these signs? Why is there nothing? What is it supposed to be? I'm like, exactly that. Take your time to ponder, walk, get lost if necessary. And that's kind of what happened. So these are just a few examples of these plexi blips. And interestingly, I found them today. They're still dirty, and my friend said keep them dirty. So if anyone wants one, intervention in the museum, perhaps? I know, right? No one will know. I was actually thinking of putting a sticker on some of you, but I decided to be nice, a blip sticker. Yeah. So these are these little markers throughout the space, and just like with Artschwager, my idea is to create a pathway, but also to draw attention and say, look around you, whether it's a boring little red pole or whether it's, the sideway, just start paying a little more attention. I took the same project a little further and created another version of it for an outdoor project in Atlanta called A New Genre Landscape. And the curator, Stuart Keeler, basically said, here's your park, do something with it, place things. So I'm like, all right, I'll take those blips. And I wanted the idea of taking what I'd already done and giving it a new life, just like Artschwager's blips kind of travel. But to this project, I also added pink because it seems so ridiculous. Whatever wood was kind of thrown away or just dying, I painted pink. Or if there were like some man-made features like the cover of a manhole cover, I painted that baby pink as well. Again, to like tickle the park a little bit and draw attention to some aspects of the park. So this tells you you are in Atlanta, Georgia, because that's I-20. I mean, I guess it could be elsewhere too. And one more image of the same little guy. I like the reflection. And it was interesting. People started Instagram. No, they didn't do Instagram. They did whatever the equivalent of selfies are. They were taking photographs and sending it to me. I'm like, it's just a modest, non-signed sign. But I guess some people kind of enjoyed it. Some people were like, what is this trash? Take it away. Which is fine, because eventually I did take it away. So there's a lot of other work I have done since then that plays with this idea of a certain mark traveling. But the one that has been most prevalent in my work is the project I've worked on most recently. And a lot of you have seen this work. I did a showing of it at the White Box this past September. Aqua Mapping is a three-part installation, three-part project where I wanted to look at different coastlines and have each of those coastlines reflect something about the topography or the climate or the history of the space. What you see in front of you is Annapolis. That's the Naval Academy. And I was looking at routes that most of the ships take and the boats take while they're following the waters of the inner harbor and in Baltimore, the Chesapeake Bay. And when I did the same project in India, southern India, in Cochin, I was looking at historic routes that Christopher Columbus did when he was looking for spices, routes that current fishermen are taking, and every time a route was drawn out, it was basically drawn out or it was mapped out with Google Pin. And at that point, I was like, what if this Google Pin became an actual thing in itself? What if I could make my own Google Pin, forget so much about the direction and the importance of that route, and just let it traverse the landscape, being its own little thing, and in the process, drawing attention to the variety of images that you see in the landscape, the flora, the fauna, the architecture, the vastness and the abyss of the blue sky and the blue ocean. So that's what Aqua Mapping became, a little Google Pin, a little cursor, a little object that looks so graphic, orange, and playful when it confronted, and this little thing that just kind of disappears into the horizon. as it goes back and back away. Essentially, with this project, I was interested in what happens when these geographical borders or these markers of territories or these markers that tell you how to go from point to point just become a physical and actual part of the landscape. So this is us launching that ball in Cochin, India. This is me on a really nice morning in Cochin. It was 4 a.m. And what I remember about this is it was the earliest I had to get up. We had to wake up at 3 o'clock to be here by 4 a.m. to catch the sunset. And that's when I got a text from the governor, Kitsapa, saying, "Welcome to the Oregon Arts Commission." So I kind of call this the commission piece. And I was like, yay, I'm so happy, I'm important. Let me go take a big orange ball into the ocean. And of course, as we were taking this I'm not on this boat, I'm in an adjoining boat. It was really a cathartic moment, or just beautiful, because people were waking up, they were in houseboats along this inner water, coming out saying, what is this thing? And they were photographing, Instagramming. And they asked me, I said, I don't know, because we were in an adjoining boat. I said, what do you think of it? It's just a big ball. They said, no, it's simple, it's beautiful, it's making us look. And I was like, thank you. Happy. So these are a few more prints, examples. So I took that project, took photographs from my video stills, and then did some screen printing on it with the idea of making it more kind of macro as opposed to micro, but then micro again, because it's like, here's this beautiful distant shot, or rather here's this beautiful distant shot, but I'm going to like make it like almost in your face and screen print this orange mark, which when seen in person is really nice, I think, because it has that texture of flat paint, and it tells you how to look. So it's a little more tongue and cheeky, literally. And I felt it was a nice way to kind of balance off the video projections when I show them collectively. Plus, screen printing is nice, and there's nothing, it's really lovely to just have one simple graphic shape. I mean, at some point I was like, I don't even want these images. I was so seduced by this beautiful orange mark and the flatness of the texture, and that's when, again, I was like, missing this guy, Richard Artschwager, and the simplicity with which he embraced this beautiful mark and kind of kept it pure and simple by keeping each mark every time it appeared as a single color or a single material. So these are just a few more shots of the same showing. This was a show of it in Atlanta, Georgia, and this was the screening of it at the White Box Gallery in Portland. And just jumping ahead again, I was talking about yellow dots, how I am all about orange dots, red dots, and yellow dots. This is a piece I did in Mississauga, which is a suburb of Canada that I had never visited. So when I was asked to do a show out there that was all about geolocation and cultural identity, I was like, I've never even been to Mississauga. I know there's a lot of Indians there, and I live in Portland, Oregon. And the curator said, sorry, we don't have money to get you, so do a site visit through the web. And everything I Googled about Mississauga took me to this building that you see out here. It's the Absolute Towers, and it was designed, I forget the name of the firm, but it's designed to kind of create this visual swirl, and it's also referred to as the Marilyn Monroe Towers. And there's something really sexy and beautiful about the curves of it. So I wanted to just point towards those curves and things around it. So I called it the Beyond Beyonce building, because there's something about the butt. And I was literally just putting these yellow dots. Again, it wasn't a Photoshop dot. I would print these images out and then screen print them. And there was a nice marriage between the newspaper texture of the base paper versus the painterliness of the screen print and how it kind of crumbled. Just like, when you put sales stickers on things, the paper around it can crush a little bit. I like that little tension. But again, I was really happy with the way the yellow dot just pointed towards these things and made you think about the sails of the building or just the gorgeousness of its curves. And my show was all about just this one yellow dot and now how it kind of played with the building itself. So as you can see from the orange dot works that I had going on in Aqua Mapping, and the yellow dots that I've also done at Disjecta, as some of you know, and the yellow dots that we just saw in this piece, I'm really interested in this act of repetition and getting an idea and repeating it. I'm also an educator, and I have to repeat myself. I also suffer from some memory loss, apparently, so I have to repeat things I do. And in art, I like this idea of repetition. If there's something good, repeat it. If you want to play with consumerism, mass produce. But every time you're mass producing, repeating, how can you still make it just as gorgeous and rich? So I look at, of course, the minimalist, and I feel really fortunate to be in a room with not just Richard Artschwager's work, but also this beautiful red piece by John Mccracken, and right next to it, the Donald Judd. I could not talk about the Judd because it's on loan, but I will, just a little bit. But I want to talk just really quickly about the work of John Mccracken. How many of you love that red leaning piece? Yes, I do. So for those of you unfamiliar with his work, he basically created a signature sculptural form, the plank, not the plank as your exercise, that plank, which is a narrow monochromatic rectangular board format that leans at an angle against the wall, while simultaneously entering the three-dimensional realm of the physical space of the viewer. What I personally also like about the plank is the slight movement that it kind of creates, and also how it goes in between the realm of painting versus sculpture, which is what my work was beginning to do in 2008, 2009. If you take a painting and put it against the wall, it is now a sculpture. If you hang a sculpture, it doesn't really become a painting. So if you want to dodge definitions or play with those boundaries, just moving things from the wall is one way of doing it, which is something Mccracken was really working with. So these are some of Mccracken's pieces. Seeing them in person, which you are privileged to have, is also beautiful. It's a sleek, gorgeous form. And it also speaks a lot about fabrication, mass production, as we know it today. Speaking of mass production, fabrication, and 20th and 21st century materials, takes me to, this is the work right here. I thought this would be a nice shot if anyone wants to take a photo. Oh, well. While I was researching all of these artists again together, and I was like, okay, Mccracken, Artschwager, and of course, Judd, I came across this book and the show called A Minimal Future, Art as Object, where these artists, the artists that were in the show and the artists that have been addressed in this book, are looking again at the role of form and sculpture and minimalism as an idea, as a whole. This show presented minimalism as a range of strategies that propelled new definitions of the structure of form, material, image, and the production of the art object, and renegotiated its relationship to space and to the spectator. I'm not moving okay, sorry. So, most of you, I imagine, know the work of Judd. I am still always fascinated, enthralled, and mesmerized by it, and I really do like the piece we have out here. I hadn't seen it before, so I'm glad the Portland Art Museum has it right now. It's like with Judd's pieces too, it's like it really makes me think about the spaces in between. And I've never seen spaces in between repetitive forms the same way after I first saw my Judd sculpture. So if nothing else, Judd has really forced me to think about the interaction between positive and negative space. And it's like, even though it's quiet and static, it makes me want to put things. And since then, I've had an obsession with shelving units. And someone asked me years ago as a kid, if you had a superpower, what would it be? And for some reason, my superpower has always been, I want the ability to build a shelf like this. So it's like you're drinking and you want to put your beer somewhere, shelf. You're painting and you have too many things, shelf. I swear, if you ask me this even 20 years from now, I wish my superpower was that I could build shelves. Imagine how easy I would have made Judd's life. This is another work by Donald Judd. I don't want to give you too much. I mean, you all know the work of Judd, and I could go on about it, but this is about Artschwager and the museum and my thoughts on those. But I hope you see my connection, obviously the curator here does, between the minimalist approach and the repetitive approach that Artschwager has, Mccracken has, and of course Donald Judd has. So I was also wanting to use Judd as a jumping off point to talk about how shelving, furniture, and support structures have influenced and entered my own personal work. So I'm going to start by a piece I did at Skowhegan, which is a residency up in Maine. It's an older work again called Yellow Rising. And this was a beautiful residency out in nature, and some students or residents would go out and sit in the sun and just zone out, while others would sit in front of the computers. And I was like, what are we doing these days? Instead of a sunset, watching a sunset sitting on a bench, we are looking at screens. So I kind of just played with that idea, and I wanted to create a bench that was levitating using a lighter color that flies with a heavier, more impactful color, which is yellow, that kind of stays stuck to the wall because it's painted. So it's a play on formalist ideas of color weight, the visual weight of color, as well as the ways in which we look, sit, and kind of ponder. This shape is again very intentionally skewed, and the skewing of shapes basically started when I did that teal piece back in Florida. This was a piece I did more recently in Ashland, Oregon. It's called Flood Control. And the idea was initially triggered by looking at Emigrant Lake, which some of you might be familiar with. That's a print I did. It's a screen print with a photograph. It's an image of Emigrant Lake. It's a lake that was built to create a man-made reservoir built to provide water to the pioneers back in the day. And in the process, at some point, a town was completely submerged, the town of Klamath Falls. And even today, when people kind of boat around or picnic around this lake, they'll see things like a shoe or a gumball machine suddenly pop up. What was interesting too is when they built this lake, they had to kill a freeway or highway that connected Oregon to California. It was called the Indian Highway, and later it was called the Dead Indian Memorial Highway. So here I was in Ashland, Oregon, looking at this man-made structure, the Dead Indian Memorial Highway that disappeared, Emigrant Lake, and I was like, all right, I want to kind of look at some of those formal ideas and create a roadway or a shelving unit that alludes to supporting this fake lake, and is also a structure that kind of gets gradually narrow as it comes down and lowers, such that it eventually just disappears into space, and before it does, it's supported by this thing, and the thing was a rock that I got from the lake itself. So, I mean, this, again, is a long stretch between what it has to do with Artschwager, but hopefully you see the connection between this, my interest in shelving, and how I start to play with it in this particular piece. So these are just a few more images of this piece. It was basically this giant blue swath that traversed the gallery space and ended in just this sharp line and this little thing that disappeared into the floor. And these are a few more images of that. Okay, is everyone with me? Very soon we're going on a walk, so just bear with me for 2 more minutes. I've been talking about support structures such as shelving that support objects, but when we need to redo an interior of a space, which was the case with my gallery in Bombay in 2012, I was going there to do a show that somehow dealt with construction, because it's an overarching theme in my work. And I spoke to my gallerist. I was like, I want to bring in materials that deal with construction and make something with that. He's like, Bawa, we don't have time right now. There's a scaffolding in the space, and there's too much going on. We'll have to push it. And then over a bunch of conversations, we said, how about we just keep that scaffolding, which is enormous, and make that the crux of the piece itself. And it was kind of fantastic. So this piece, called Another Documentation, was one I did in 2012, where I took the literal support system, support here because it's supporting the ability to repaint this ginormous space that's 80 feet high, and I made it the artwork in itself, and I painted it bright orange to allude to caution as well as play, because it also reminded me of a jungle gym. And I just placed it in the space that it already was occupying, but instead of being on the walls, it became this Tower of Babel-like structure that never quite reached the top of the ceiling. But again, for me, it was a fun project to just, work with one object, really, which was a scaffolding, and think of it as a giant blob of text that I was basically punctuating with things like black rafters or gray tape, again, little materials that belong to the language of building and construction and architecture. And these are just a few more images. That's me modeling. That's my gallerist. He's like, I want this shot of you exiting the piece. I was like, okay. And that's basically it with some of the work I wanted to talk about within this context of repetition, modularity, units, one shape repeating itself, and then talking about support structures. And I want to talk a little further about support structures as well as we go walk through the museum and go to the, which wing are we going to? Where are you? What's the wing we're going to? The second wing? Yeah, the Belusky wing, which is in the first, second, and third floor. Pietro Belusky, as you guys know, was the main architect of the Portland Art Museum. This building we're standing in right now is the fourth wing, and it was, even though it was built in 1924 as a Masonic temple, it was purchased by the museum in 1995, and it's only in 2005 that was redesigned. The interior was redesigned by Serra Architects and another group. And when I first visited this wing of the museum in 2010, I didn't like it at all. I didn't like how narrow it was, how I had to see my favorite Dorothea Rockburn like this. But over time, I was like, you know what, there's something challenging about the architecture of this space, the way this architecture is framing artwork and how it's forcing you to navigate what you know in many different ways, instead of walking into a big wide space like you do at the MoMA, or instead of being forced to spiral down like you do at the Guggenheim. This place is messing with your sense of direction. And for someone who's directionally challenged, initially I don't like that. But after overcoming my fear, I think there's something nice about being cut off and not knowing how you're going to get back to that Judd you saw. And in the process, you have to see these impressionist paintings and you're like, oh my God, more, no, and oh my God, look at that impressionist painting. It's actually really great. So it's like a maze you get lost in. And I kind of have started enjoying that experience. And I've been here like 6 times in the past 5 days. I'm still a little confused. And today Betsy was showing me the map. I'm like, I still don't get it. But I think that's okay. So what I want us to do is, as we walk from here to the next space, since we're talking about support structures, whether it's shelving units or whether it's frames or scaffoldings that aren't here right now, think about everything in a museum that is working to make the experience of viewing art better, and how that is subconsciously affecting the way we walk through and experience the space. If you can, block out the art for just a second and notice the lighting structure, notice the tracks, notice and experience the architecture of the space. We emptied out a gallery for you so that you could actually see a gallery space in a museum with no art in it. And also, think of what Belusky might have intended with the 3 wings that he designed, and how it's so different from this 4th wing that was designed, the interior of which was designed by completely different architects. Pietro Belusky is well known in Portland, and soon I'll be doing work based off his blueprints at the Belusky Pavilion at Merrillhurst. So this again was a nice way for me to enter and understand his architecture, but also understand some of his furniture. So we're going to end with a walkthrough of the space, and it's not just with the intention of getting from point A to point B. Ponder as you walk, and towards our end point, we're going to end sitting on Belusky benches, but on our way, I'm going to show you 3 or 4 of his other benches, which I think are fantastic. And at that point, I'll talk a little bit about benches in my work. And please ask me questions then, because I've just been, All right, so Betsy will be leading us. We'll walk slowly so you can Photoshop visually out all the artwork and embrace the space of art. So we're in a gallery that's showcasing work from the Andes, and in front of you is a beautiful bench. I don't know how often you pay attention to benches in museums, but I think you should start doing so because you'll notice sometimes they really look like the art, which was the case with me very recently at the National Gallery at the Tate. I was like, should I sit? Should I not? Should I sit? And I still don't know if it was art or not. I will find out. But there's a couple of benches by the architect of the building, Pietro Belluschi, that you'll see throughout the space. And I ask you to ask yourself if you feel any of its form and function or structure resonates the structure and the architecture of the building. To me, it does, and I think it's really nice when the architect has some kind of say and interest in the fixtures of the building, the interior design of the building, the interior architecture, and in a space like a museum that is really like, there's not many objects around unless it's a sculptural space, the bench becomes really important. In most of my work, I've tried to get rid of benches and galleries, and I'm going to divert. I was told I could do this slightly impromptu style of presenting. I hope you all will bear with me. Is that a yes? Yes. Thank you. So can we all see? So this is a Belluschi bench. It might be this right here. And it reminded me of this show that I did at the Columbus Museum in Georgia. I was asked to do something in a really narrow, small space with a beautiful vaulted ceiling and a bench that was just sitting there. So my first question was, can we get rid of the bench? And they're like, yeah, no, maybe. So I was like, fine, I'm going to make this bench really resonate in my piece because I felt the shape of it. I mean, it wasn't ugly, and it resonated the architecture. So I started creating these, again, lozenge-like shapes coming from Artschwager, and also it reflected some of this neoclassical architecture, and the color of it came from looking at the different colors of the rooms. So start paying attention to the colors of rooms based on the period and what they're housing. The color I finally used was a combination of the work that housed Indian art and itinerant art. So I thought it was a perfect combination because I was the other Indian and the itinerant, the traveler. But of course, it was a color I was formally drawn to as well. So what you see out here is these golden barristers leading you down to the space of the show. Here are a few drawings that I created, and here was the work itself. And this lozenge-like shape came from looking at the bench, the color I just explained. And I was also thinking about how work is housed in the backgrounds of a museum, in vaults and in crates. So these little dividers came from looking at dividers and crates, and the shape also came from looking at vaults. And if we had more time, I really wanted us to look at the vault and storage spaces of this museum. But if you notice, a lot of museums where older work is showcased, we have a similar kind of ceiling. I just noticed that too. So what you see out here is the same shape, and on the opposite end of the wall, I had these hand-drawn lines that alluded to notepaper, and there was a little bit of golden on them that was borrowing from the golden of these railings. Framing is something that has always really bothered me as a two-dimensional artist, which is what I was for a long time. So I started embracing this idea of framing by creating a work where there was a divorce between the framed thing and the frame itself. And then they were starting to find a way to kind of come together, and eventually kind of coming together a little more, but still having slight kind of disagreements and for more disagreements. So it's like, the structure becomes the thing of the work itself. And that, again, is our bench.
One of the things that comes to mind,
Yeah.
is silhouette.
Is what?
Silhouette.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
The lines, the line quality.
Oh, yeah.
Or the placement.
Oh, yeah. No, he's a big influence on my work, too. So, and if he had more of his, I would probably talk about that. But I liked, again, talking about Artschwager from a repetitive point of view, and I thought it would be a nice way. And maybe there's still no connection between Belluschi, the museum, and benches, but hopefully you saw some, because this, too, is a thing that is being repeated. and it's not drawing attention to what's around it, but it's creating a space for you to sit and maybe update Facebook, or hopefully look at the work around you. We have 2 more spots we want to see. I'm going to show you 3 more benches by Belusky, but Betsy and I arranged for this gallery to be empty. Not. Yeah. Say what?
The parquet and
Oh, yeah, yeah. So notice that these walls are made of fabric. And you can touch this. There's a Korean artist who's a colleague of mine, Chanel Kim, who's done a series of photographs of people looking at nothing in a museum or just staring. So if he was here right now, he'd probably be really thrilled just taking a photograph of looking. It's like, when you go to the Louvre, how many people really get a kick out of seeing the Mona Lisa? It's more interesting watching people take photographs. And I think Heidi was talking about that in her talk, about how she saw one of the chapels through all the cameras that people...
It's not photographs anymore, it's walls of iPads.
I know.
So it's just a solid wall.
Yeah. And selfie sticks. One country has now banned them. I don't know, it was in the news. I'm sorry, you can't go there.
What do you think of the shadows?
Sorry?
The shadows, that's what I see.
See, and then this is what, because of the space of emptiness.
The lighting's amazing.
Yeah.
When you walk in here, that creates a two-dimensional
Yeah.
image on the wall.
You became aware of yourself too? Okay, so we're walking a little more again. This is for you to enjoy this empty space. Another of these benches. So I brought you into this room because I was again attracted to the color of the walls out here, and it made me think about how I work with my color choices when I hang my work in a space. If it's a plain white wall, I have a problem. And Gabe's here, so I just remember one of my first wall pieces in Portland was at Place Gallery, which some of you are familiar with. It's the space he started at a mall, and I was like, oh my God. But it was great. And there was one wall that was unfinished, and you could also see the seams of the molding. And the person who had drywalled the wall had numbers written in blue pencil. What's, the blue pencil you use as a drafter. So I made that wall with the information on it the premise of my work, which was nice. So yeah, in this room, I wanted you to take notice of the color, ask yourself if it works, if it's distracting, but more importantly, the bench again. It's another bench. This bench, unlike the ones we just saw, which were simpler, is also a Belushi bench, and I noticed that when I read the label out here, which I think is kind of nice.
Can you do that, read a label?
It's on the other side. But then the thing is, do we put labels on everything? And does it become more about the label? So you see one bench here. There's one more of the same bench on the opposite side. And as we make our way through this space towards the main entrance, you'll notice the last 2 benches. So please, again, embrace and try and enjoy and embrace the space of the building as we walk through it. So please take a seat if you want on these 2 benches by Pietro Belusky again. And here with this, we are at the end of my talk/tour, and I thought it'd be really interesting to end with the main and the first wing of the museum, which is this. It was literally just this, built in 1932. And it's only later that it expanded to that and everything else you saw today. FYI, before this, the museum was in the library for about 30 years before it had its own brick and mortar space on 5th and Taylor, and then this over here. Again, I thought it would be nice to end with this as an ode to Peter Belusky and his repetitive motifs of the 2 benches. Well, does anyone have questions? Anything about my work? Richard Artschwager? Benches? Chairs?
Tell us about your journal. The journal that you started,
Drain, oh, yeah, sure. Well, drainmag.com is an online journal that is something I do with 3 or 4 other people. And since my work is so almost specific, dealing with furniture, site, space, minimalism, travel, I use Drain as a space where I can look at other ideas and issues and work with writers, because that's something I suffer from, good writing. I feel smarter when I'm around them, and I understand the process of writing while working with them, and I get to reach a wider audience outside of Oregon. So working with Drain allows me to work with artists, writers, poets, and topics that I don't necessarily cover in my own artwork. And it keeps me current and it keeps me engaged. Sometimes it takes over my artistic practice more than it needs to, but every now and then it's really worth it, and it exposes me to things I don't know. For those of you who don't know, Drain, again, is an online journal published biannually, and issue on Junk Ocean just came out 5 days ago. The issue before that, which is also accessible online, was on athleticism, which was one that I edited. I thought it was pretty nice. And soon we'll be having one on dirt and AIDS in memorial culture. So check it out, and I hope some of you will consider contributing. Yeah. Anything else? Work? Drinks? Yes. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much
Yeah.
for this very kind of elegant movement through these different topics.
Thank you.
I love getting to the final resting point of the benches.
Yeah.
That's why we were talking about shelves right here.
Yeah.
I feel like this was a very special opportunity.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
I have a general artist question.
Uh-huh.
I mean, for someone who responds to sites and situations,
Mm-hmm.
are there things that you do on a more regular basis in your own studio or part of your practice? What are those kind of things?
I would like to say yes, but in all honesty, lately I have not, and that has to change.
Yeah.
But by and large, yes, I like to maintain a more rigorous drawing practice. So some of the drawings I showed you with misaligned frames, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I get so off, I give myself a project where I'm like, no matter what you do a drawing a day. You have to do. Like, you make a film every day.
Yeah.
That's Julie Perini, she makes a movie every day. How many? Yeah. Oh, wow. So it's the same kind of idea. And I actually love it. I love working with site and space, but there's so many variables, so many people, so many budgets, so much travel, that sometimes the whole experience does get a little diluted. But when I can go into my own studio, work on a large scale, and be undisturbed and quiet, and that's when, people think I mostly like excitement and noise around me, but in my studio, nothing. I'll have one CD, I play it for a month.
Right.
Because I want to know what's happening next. I wash my hands 50 times in a day when I work in my studio, because I want the drawings to be clean and pristine. But there's a moment of, a zen moment, basically, that I have in that studio when I'm doing these drawings. And sometimes they're drawings for the site-based installation. Sometimes they're just experiments with line and texture or perspective, things that I'm talking about in my class. I just want to mess with it further,
Sounds like a trance a little bit.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I mean, it seems like maybe there's times when you need to be outward. And
Yeah.
But then you need to be inward.
Yes. Yeah, very much. And lately there's been so much video and film and sound and my God, I don't know how you people do it. Oh, my resolution's low, this is not compatible, and this at the end of the day, no one can take drawing away from you. It's so straightforward and pure.
Right.
Even if your Mac's old, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Anything else? I'll be happy to. There's wine, apparently. Yeah. Yeah. Did they make the special wine?